You confront problems. You don't confront people. And not everybody could handle that distinction.
On this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast, we sit down with Ron Whittier. After receiving his PhD in 1965, Ron entered the emerging semiconductor industry at Fairchild Semiconductors, where he did basic research and development. In 1970, he joined a startup called Intel Corporation as engineer and manager in the company's first manufacturing plant. Over the years, he held many roles, including Director of Technology and Development and Engineering, General Manager of the Memory Product Division, Director of Corporate Marketing, Founder and Director of Intel Architecture Labs, and General Manager of the Digital Content Group. On this week's episode, we hear a little bit about the history of Intel, Ron's career, and much more. It's a short episode, but everything in here is powerful. There's so many amazing takeaways that I know everyone here is going to enjoy it. And if you want to hear more, James Cape, president of Intel Alumni Network, did a fantastic interview with him that we will have a link in the show notes. All right, now let's begin. Enjoy. Ron, you're with Intel from the very early days. Was there any pressure put on the team for that explosive growth? Because, really, the company just was like a rocket ship there.
Well, there wasn't any external pressure. Everyone knew what the game plan was. Everyone knew that time to market was essential. Everyone knew that they were in a critical position because everyone was in a critical position. So the pressure was internally driven. Everyone understood that they had to perform. So was there top-down pressure? No. I don't recall any time at Intel where there was top-down pressure from managers above me to perform, because everyone was so motivated within the company. It was an exciting time to work there. So it's internally generated. That motivation is internally generated, and that's what drives you. But top-down management pressure, that's not what drives you.
That's interesting that everyone was self-motivated, it sounded like. Was there any perks or anything at that time? Did you have a ping pong table or a pool table or anything to really encourage the people to...
Not at that time, no. There was the wagon wheel. You went out and got gas, after working all day. Or if you were part of the team there was this exercise of looking at the ruby lifts associated with some of the early circuits, because it was not all automated at that time. And after the examination of the ruby lift by basically everybody, you would go to one of the beer halls and celebrate and take the afternoon off on Friday. Friday afternoons could be pretty relaxed. But no ping pong tables, no basketball courts. Ultimately, there was a movement in the Robert Noyce building to put in a rec area, and I never went there. It wasn't part of me to go to that particular place, but I understand we kind of loosened up. I think some of the pressures of Silicon Valley must have caught up with Intel.
Speaking of pressures in Silicon Valley, well, at least when I talked to some of the Intel alumni guys, for example, James Cape, who was on the show in the past, there's a lot of colorful language used in conversation that wouldn't work in most startups, that ecosystem today. How was the communication back then? Because from my understanding, it was pretty direct, and people would tell each other, these are your responsibilities. How was that communication internal?
Well, the communication internal was different than that. The issue was the confrontation came when there were problems. And you would get in a room, and if there was a problem on direction, a problem on a technical problem, a problem on anything, there was a free-for-all on what the hell to do about it. And that's where this notion of constructive confrontation started to become part of the culture inside of Intel at that point in time, which is you attacked problem. The issue became sometimes when you're attacking the problem, some people got off course and attacked the person who was presenting the problem. That became problematic. So people had to start to make sure that everyone understood the notion of constructive confrontation. You confront problems. You don't confront people. And not everybody could handle that distinction.
Were there trainings for this? Were there courses? How did people get accustomed to knowing we're attacking the problem, we're not attacking?
The training was all real time. When things got out of hand, somebody would kind of come in and shut it down. And there'd be a little bit of discussion about, hey, we're supposed to be attacking the problem, not the person. But if you were the person bringing in the problem, sometimes there was stray gunfire that captured you. Okay.
Feel free to share any stories if you'd like.
No. I don't want to name names, but some people had a lot more stray bullets than others.
Were there any other companies in Silicon Valley or in the tech space that you looked at and said, you know what, the way they're managing or their operations, we could learn some lessons from them. We could pull some ideas? Or was what we're doing at Intel, the way we're handling problems, the way we're growing our management, everything was so above everyone else, you never looked at any other people on the playing field?
I think we continued to look. Not intentionally looking at them from the standpoint of the way they're running a business, but I think my impression in looking at companies that we were working with and collaborating with, they weren't quite as fast. The thing that always struck me about Intel is the speed at which things were moving. And if you went to some of the established companies, things were slower. And that was a distinguishing feature. And I think there was little to take away from that other than the fact that we don't want to be slower.
Now, is that everyone's going slower for other hardware companies you're working with? Or was that hardware and software? Was that hardware in just the US versus Japan? Or was it, yes, we notice these things more with this group than these others?
I think it was general. In other words, certainly true, you'd want to drive the hardware companies faster, particularly if you're trying to make transitions from one generation to the next generation. And the pace, I think we were very pushy in trying to move those things ahead, obviously, for our own interest. If you look at software, clearly we wanted to move software faster. And we took some things into our own hands of trying to do some software internally that more naturally would have been done externally. But if there was a roadblock, I think we tended to take the roadblock and try to drive it inside. So Craig Kinney would take hardware platform issues and bring them inside, debug them inside, and get the necessary software modifications done inside, rather than wait for the industry to move ahead. So I think we made more proposals to the industry overall during those period of time on standards for the platform than any other company.
Did the fact that Intel, the corporate VC arm, did that play a role with how quick everything in Intel was pushing? Because at that time, Intel is really the first corporate VC.
Intel started making investments, in external companies pretty early. When I was running business development, we have a number of companies that we invested in. Some of them did okay, some of them didn't do so okay. I have some, plastic modules upstairs on some of the companies that went public. I don't know how many of them have survived today. So the issue of risk-taking and the fact that there was excess money available to invest outside was early. Anything that could enhance the platform was game for an investment. But as when he did the Intel Capital deal in the 90s, lifted it up one level because he had much more money and really, I think, was friends with Arthur Rock, and I think the two of them conspired to make a very big deal out of it. And it is a big deal. But there was always an inclination to invest, to enhance the platform. Anything that could be used in directly or indirectly to enhance the platform in the marketplace was fair game for investments.
Did that push for speed, did it accelerate your whole career at Intel, or was there a peak and a valley kind of with the Intel pushing the entire market for speed?
I think speed is an essential and has never dropped off. There's always a sense of urgency in the company. If it's not moving fast enough, somebody's going to pass you. And you knew that. I mean, the competition was very visible in everything we did, whether we were designing memory chips, where we always had somebody designing an alternative memory design. So the chip designs were competitive. Every aspect of the industry is totally competitive. And if you don't want to compete, you shouldn't be in that industry.
For your industry, or for your career at Intel, you were at 6 or 7 different kind of positions, correct? Or
yes, that's right. Yes.
Can you talk about that, and how did they make a decision? Now it's time to move this team over here versus let's just hire a group over here. How was that thought process of, let's move Ron to Oregon or these other locations?
I think it was necessity. The first major move for me was when I was the engineering manager in Fab 1, we wanted to set up the second fab, and we needed a plant manager for the second fab. Whittier, you're the plant manager for Fab 2. So you go over, you do Fab 2. While you're doing Fab 2 and bringing Fab 2 up, they find somebody who is a plant manager from another company and bring them in and say, okay, you do the plant, Whittier, we better get R&D going. So you're now in charge of R&D. There was no R&D. Everything was done online in the factories. So they said, we're going to have formally doing R&D. Whittier, you're in charge of R&D. And then you evolve and you got the R&D and you're doing memories. You got to have a chip to essentially drive your R&D, so you're doing memories. And all of a sudden you're R&D and engineering manager. And then the thing gets a little bigger and they say, hey, we don't have enough workforce in Silicon Valley. We have to get out of here. We got to go to Oregon because they got more workforce and there's a wide open workforce up there. Whittier, get 400 guys and go to Oregon and take your division to Oregon. I think every time they wanted to do something, they say, hey, Whittier, we don't have a marketing department. Whittier, you're in charge of marketing. Okay, Whittier, you're in charge of software. Okay. So, by the way, that kept me somewhat engaged.
I would hope so.
So anytime I turned around, it was, off to another area. So I think the very key thing for people who are moving into industry to realize that it's very important to keep moving. You never want to get stagnant. You want to go on where you have a kind of if you saturate in what you're doing, you want to go on to the next deal where you get that initial acceleration in, your own energy and what you're doing on the next assignment. And you grow, each one of these things is a growing experience. So don't stay in the same job more than 4 years.
What would advice you'd give to a young entrepreneur, person entering the workforce right now, where you're at Intel most of your career versus now in Silicon Valley, people are jumping around every year or two?
I, kind of don't buy into it. I would say that what has happened is in one of those jumps, someone has not challenged that individual and given them something that they really can get their teeth into and make a contribution. If you're kind of, you go in and dabble for a while you didn't accomplish anything, it's a complete waste of time. You may have very broad exposure, but no accomplishment. So I don't believe in people who kind of tiptoe around without making a contribution. I'm kind of historically a results-oriented guy. You go into a job and you do something for a couple of years, put a product in the market, do something substantial, then it's okay to jump around. But if you've not done anything in any of them, you can't do anything in a year. So I'm not a big fan of that.
What are some of your proudest moments of your time at Intel?
The 400 guys going to Oregon. I mean, I felt like the Pied Piper. Okay, we're all going up there, and that was a hell of an effort. I mean, picking up families and taking them up there was a big deal. A lot of fun. I mean, I was very fortunate to have as many assignments as I had at Intel. Late in career when we did the Intel Content Group, and you're down in Hollywood at CAA, dealing with all these A-level people, But the big disappointment in that one was we had a big party when we put a lab into CAA. I think you may have talked to Avram Miller, but Avram Miller and I, we're down in LA, and Avram was wheeling and dealing with everybody and telling me what clothes I should wear and what store I should buy, because if you're going to go into Hollywood, you have to have a certain kind of suit, yada, yada. But anyhow, we put a lab into CAA. And at the opening of the lab, we get all these A-level actresses and, coming to the lab. So I go back to the Intel staff meeting, the Intel executive staff meeting, and say, we're opening the lab, and we get all these high-level actresses, and everybody's coming. And I kind of listed some of the young ladies young actresses who were coming, and I sold it to the Intel staff, the executive staff. So they all fly down to the opening CAA, and half of them did not show up. So I heard more shit about that for many years. You didn't deliver the body.
So the internal talk was not, you brought 400 people to Oregon, opened this whole factory. It was, you didn't have the A-listers in Hollywood at the factory.
That's the deal.
It's funny how people remember you by. Let's go back to the
Have you interviewed Mike Amar?
No, not yet.
He's still hassling me about the damn A-list.
Let's set up the interview. Let's go back to the 400 families to Oregon. How did you convince? Because here, if you were to ask a group to move, it would be
400 people.
Or 400 people with families. I mean, here to get people to relocate from one city to another, you'd have protests. People would be online doing TikTok videos, how evil of a company, make me move my work-life balance. How was it done then that 400 employees were, guys, this is the opportunity over here. Let's move. Let's do this. And did you lose a lot of people, or?
No, actually, our success rate was very high. Oregon is very nice. Portland was very nice. A very nice environment. I mean, and my recollection on the way it worked is you kind of go down the stack. If you get your direct reports to go, then they get theirs, and you have parties at your home for the people who are going, and it's a continuous sell. And initially announced in '77 and the move in '78. It's kind of a miracle that it happened in retrospect.
And did any of those families show up in Oregon and go, hey, where are the A-listers? Okay, so what advice would you give the younger Intel employees, the ones that right now are thinking of joining the company, joining the team?
I would say if you're joining the Intel team today, it's particularly critical to understand that, one, you have an opportunity, and two, you have an obligation to make a contribution. And you should be prepared to work hard to make that contribution. It will set a pattern for your life. Either you're going to work hard and, get a mindset that working is good and contributions are good, and that's what my life is about. or you're going to lose it. So it starts when you get that job. And you should decide you're going to work and do whatever it takes to make that happen. And if you're not, you really shouldn't join Intel.
One more question for wrapping up, or maybe two or three, we'll see. When you listen to the historians talk about Intel, what are they missing? Because they weren't there. What are they not grasping, understanding, or getting wrong?
What they're probably missing is the camaraderie that exists within the company when you're being successful in accomplishing things. And there's a lot of fun in the company. That fun is based on success of the individual and the individual's organization. I don't think they capture that. You don't see a lot about, the April Fool's edition of Intel Leads. You don't see anything about some of the parties and some of the stuff that's going on in the wagon wheel. So they don't talk much about the social life that existed. So I would say they don't communicate how exciting it can be, but that excitement is dependent on the people understanding they're supposed to be excited about something and have a good time about it. So it's all about technical and money and everything else, which that's extremely important, but the fun side of it is not described.
I'm curious if the Hollywood thing got in the April 1st edition.
Oh, I'm sure it did. I can't remember, but it probably did. But there should be a version of that. If you take the Intel Leads covers, and particularly around the April Fool's area, some of those are absolutely priceless in that period of time. There should be somebody generating a current version of those things today.
Sounds like even though so much was done, so much hard work, sounds like everyone really had a good time. Sounds like it was almost a family.
Families have arguments, right? Families have conflict, right? Yeah.
Target the person, not the problem.
But in the sense of a family, if you take the total spectrum of things that go on within a family, like a family. There's the good and the bad. Mostly good.
Ron, with that, I want to thank you for taking your time to be on this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. And I want to thank James Cave for setting up this interview and everyone else that came here today. So with that, Ron, thank you. This is fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.